The first time I realized my husband had drained our savings, it wasn't in private. It was under bright lights with people watching. The bank lobby smelled like burnt coffee and printer ink. A line of customers stood behind me, shoes squeaking on the polished floor. The teller stared at her screen, then back at me, then at the screen again. Her voice dropped. "Ma'am, your joint account balance is $32. I laughed out of pure shock. $32 couldn't even buy lunch. My cheeks burned as a man behind me sighed loudly. That's when my husband, Mark, stepped closer, leaning on the counter like this was all a joke. He wore that smug half smile I had learned to fear. "Oh, come on," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't act surprised." I turned to him, my hands shaking. "Where is the money, Mark?" He rolled his eyes and smirked. "Relax, you wouldn't understand finances anyway." Then he added, cutting and clear, "You're just my wife, not my partner." The words hit harder than any slap. The lobby went dead silent. Even the printer stopped whirring. No one moved. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. I felt small, exposed, humiliated. Then something unexpected happened. A man I had never seen before stepped out of line. He was older, calm, wearing a simple gray coat. He looked at Mark, then at the teller. "Excuse me," he said evenly. "Could you please pull up the transaction history for the last 90 days? Mark laughed. "And who are you?" The stranger didn't answer him. He placed a black card on the counter instead. The teller's eyes widened. Her posture changed instantly. "Yes, sir," she said. Whispers rippled through the room. Heads turned. Phones came out. Mark's smile faded as numbers filled the screen. Large transfers, private accounts. One name repeated again and again. Mark's. "What is this?" Mark snapped, his face draining of color. The stranger finally looked at him. "This," he said calmly, "is evidence." Mark stepped back like he'd been punched. For the first time, he looked scared. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Because what Mark didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I wasn't as powerless as I looked. I had been quiet on purpose, watching, preparing, and I was about to take everything back. But to understand how I got there, you need to go back to 3 weeks earlier, the night I overheard a phone call that changed my life forever. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to Social Old Channel. We're creating a community of people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now, back to the story. 3 weeks earlier, my life still looked normal. Not happy, not perfect, just normal enough to trust. Every morning started the same way. The soft whir of the coffee machine at 6:10 a.m., the smell of toast just beginning to burn. Mark standing at the kitchen counter in his pressed shirt, scrolling through his phone like the weight of the world lived inside it. "Big day," he'd say, without looking up. It was always a big day. I used to believe that meant he was working for us. Our house felt lived in, but careful. Neutral colors, no clutter. The kind of home that looks stable from the outside, even when the walls are listening. Mark liked things quiet, controlled, predictable. I learned early that questions disrupted his rhythm, so I didn't ask many. At night, he'd sit on the edge of the bed, laptop balanced on his knees, blue light cutting across his face, numbers on spreadsheets, charts I didn't understand. Whenever I walked in, he'd minimize the screen just a second too late. "Work stuff," he'd say casually. "You wouldn't be interested." He said that a lot. Not cruelly, not loudly, just enough to remind me where I stood. I told myself that was marriage. Division of roles, trust. He handled the money, I handled the rest of our life. Meals, birthdays, remembering which bills were due even if I wasn't the one paying them. Sometimes, late at night, his phone would buzz. Once, twice, then silence. He'd step into the hallway to take the call, closing the door softly, like he was protecting my sleep. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling fan as it clicked unevenly, listening to his voice drop into a register I never heard during the day. Lower, sharper, urgent. One night, I caught a word through the door. Transfer. I sat up. The house was quiet otherwise. No TV, no music, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of Mark pacing the hallway. I told myself it was nothing. People move money around all the time. That's what financially responsible husbands do, right? When he came back to bed, he smelled faintly of cold air and mint gum. He slid under the covers like nothing had happened, one arm draping over my waist. "You okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," he said instantly, too instantly. "Just work." I nodded into the pillow. My chest felt tight, but I ignored it. I was good at ignoring things. Years of practice had taught me that peace often lived on the other side of silence. The next morning, I noticed something small. Our shared desk drawer, the one where we kept insurance papers and old bank statements, was slightly open. Just a crack, barely noticeable, but I always closed it all the way. Inside, the folders weren't in the same order. A blue one was missing. I stood there longer than I needed to, my fingers resting at the edge of the drawer. My heart told me to look deeper. My instincts whispered that this was the moment. Instead, I closed the drawer, because back then I still believed trust was something you protected, even when it made you uneasy. That night, Mark kissed my forehead before bed. "Don't worry so much," he said, like he could hear my thoughts. "I've got everything under control." I watched him turn off the light, and for the first time in our marriage, I wondered what everything really meant. It happened 3 nights later. Not during an argument, not during a crisis, but during one of those quiet evenings that lull you into believing nothing bad could possibly be unfolding. The rain had just started outside, light at first, tapping against the windows like hesitant fingers. I was in the living room folding laundry, the television playing softly in the background, something forgettable, something safe. Mark's phone buzzed on the coffee table. Once, twice. He glanced at the screen and stiffened. "I'm going to step out," he said, already reaching for his jacket. "This is work." I didn't answer. I just watched him. He didn't meet my eyes. The front door clicked shut behind him, slower than usual. I waited until I heard his footsteps move toward the driveway. Then I muted the TV and sat very still, the half-folded shirt resting in my hands. A minute passed. Then I heard his voice. Not outside, but coming from the balcony. Our bedroom door was cracked open, just enough. I stood without thinking, my pulse loud in my ears, and moved down the hallway as quietly as I could. The carpet muffled my steps. The rain had grown heavier now, giving me cover. Mark was standing on the balcony, back turned, phone pressed hard to his ear. "You told me I'd have more time," he said. I froze. His tone wasn't the one he used at work dinners or family gatherings. This was stripped of charm, tight, controlled. A woman's voice answered, low, impatient. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard the edge in it. "No," Mark said sharply. "I moved it already, a large amount." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Moved it? You think I don't know the risk?" he continued. "Relax, it's in a private account. She doesn't check." She. My fingers curled into the doorframe. "She trusts me," he said, almost laughing now. "Why wouldn't she?" The rain drowned out part of the conversation, but not enough. "I'll handle it," Mark snapped. "Just stop calling me like this." A pause. Then, quieter, but somehow worse, "She's not a problem." The call ended. Mark stayed there for a moment, staring out into the dark, his shoulders rising and falling as he took a breath. Then he straightened, slipped the phone into his pocket, and turned back toward the bedroom. I stepped back just in time, my heart slamming against my ribs. I was sitting on the edge of the bed when he walked in, pretending to scroll through my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the mattress to steady them. "All good?" I asked, forcing the words out. He smiled, warm, easy, the smile I used to trust. "Yeah," he said, "just some idiot who doesn't understand deadlines." He climbed into bed beside me, close enough that I could smell the rain on his jacket. He reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze back either. The ceiling fan spun above us, casting slow shadows across the room. I stared up at it, replaying every word, every tone, every pause. She trusts me. She doesn't check. It's in a private account. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to Mark breathe, realizing something terrifying and clarifying all at once. The man beside me had a life I knew nothing about, and he was paying for it with money that belonged to both of us. By morning, my fear had hardened into something else. Focus. Because that was the moment I stopped wondering if something was wrong and started figuring out how much he had taken. The first thing I learned was this: money leaves fingerprints. Mark believed I didn't check. He was right, until he wasn't. The morning after the phone call, I waited until he left for work. Same routine, same rushed goodbye, same promise to be late. I watched his car disappear down the street before I moved. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I made coffee. The kitchen felt different now, like I was standing inside a photograph of my old life, familiar, but no longer mine. I sat at the table with my laptop and opened the banking app we shared, the one Mark assumed was just a formality. The login worked. That alone surprised me. The balance loaded, and for a brief moment, everything looked normal, enough money to feel safe. Enough to make doubt feel silly. I almost closed the app right there. Almost. Then I tapped transaction history. At first, it was boring. Groceries, utilities, mortgage, the rhythm of a married life. But as I scrolled back, something shifted. Small transfers. Not one big withdrawal, not a dramatic theft, just quiet movements. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, always spaced out, always timed right after deposits. Each one labeled vaguely: investment, consulting, internal transfer. My throat tightened. I pulled out a notebook and started writing them down. Dates, amounts, descriptions. The list grew faster than I expected. By the time I reached 3 months back, my hand was cramping. The total sat at the bottom of the page like an accusation. It was more than I earned in a year. I checked the statements Mark kept in the drawer, the ones he thought I never opened, the missing blue folder, the one I'd noticed but ignored. It wasn't gone. It was hidden, behind old tax returns, pushed back like something shameful. Inside were printed confirmations, account numbers I didn't recognize, a different bank, a different address, everything in his name alone. My name wasn't anywhere. I felt the air leave my lungs slowly, like I'd been underwater too long. That afternoon, I called the bank. I didn't accuse. I didn't confront. I asked questions the way curious people do, innocent, careful. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. "Yes, ma'am, that account exists." "No, ma'am, you're not listed as an owner." "No, ma'am, I can't give you access." I thanked her and hung up. Mark came home late that night, tired and irritable. He dropped his keys louder than usual, his jaw tight. "Everything okay?" I asked, passing him a plate of food. He didn't look at me. "Just stressed." I watched him eat, watched his hands, steady, confident, the hands of a man who believed he was untouchable. "Hey," I said lightly, "did we move some money recently? I was organizing paperwork." His fork paused for half a second. Then he laughed. "Why would you worry about that? I handle it." There it was again, that invisible wall. I nodded. Right, of course. That night, I lay awake replaying the numbers in my head. Not just the money, but the planning, the patience. This wasn't a mistake or a bad decision. This was intentional. And worse than the missing money was the realization that settled in, quietly, heavily in my chest. If he could lie this smoothly about something this big, then I had no idea who I was married to. By the end of that week, I wasn't confused anymore. I was certain. The money wasn't lost, it was hidden, and Mark never meant for me to find it, which meant I had to decide something far more important than what to do next. I had to decide how long I was willing to pretend I knew nothing at all. Once you know the truth, everything looks different. Mark didn't change. That was the most unsettling part. He still kissed my cheek in the mornings, still complained about traffic, still talked about our future like it was a shared destination instead of a private escape plan. But now I could see the seams, the way he guarded his phone, the way certain names never came up, the way he spoke about risk, other people's risk. I started paying attention to patterns instead of promises. On Wednesday evenings, he stayed late at work, always Wednesdays, always unreachable between 7 and 9. On Saturdays, he took calls in the car instead of the house. He parked 2 blocks away when he did. One night, I followed him. Not dramatically, no racing hearts, no confrontation fantasy. I waited 10 minutes after he left, then drove calmly, keeping a safe distance. He didn't notice. He never did. He pulled into a quiet office complex across town. No sign, no logo, just glass doors and dark windows. He went inside like he belonged there. I waited. When he came out an hour later, he wasn't alone. She was younger than I expected. Confident, well-dressed in a way that suggested she was used to expensive things. They didn't touch, but they stood too close. Familiar, comfortable. Partners, not lovers, something colder. I took one photo, just one. Not of their faces, but of the building behind them, the address visible. Proof of location, not emotion. I drove home before he did. That night, I sat at the dining table and opened my notebook again. I wrote down everything. Dates, times, addresses, account fragments. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was documenting. The next discovery came by accident. I was sorting through old email backups, looking for an insurance document, when I found a thread I didn't recognize. Not sent to me, not sent from me, but forwarded, archived, buried. Mark had used our shared computer years ago. He'd forgotten. The emails weren't romantic, they were strategic. We'll keep it off the main books. Her credit profile makes this easier. Once it scales, I'll move everything. Her credit profile? Mine. That was the moment the betrayal fully formed its shape. This wasn't just about stolen savings. It was about access, about leverage, about using my stability as camouflage. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. I could confront him, I imagined it clearly, his denial, his anger, his sudden promises. I imagined the money disappearing overnight, moved again, farther this time, beyond reach. That's when I understood something essential. If I spoke now, I would lose. So I didn't. Instead, I smiled more, asked fewer questions, let him believe he was still invisible. I became exactly what he thought I was, uninformed, dependent, quiet. But underneath, something had shifted. I wasn't hurt anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was patient. Because the man I was married to had built an entire second life behind my back. And now that I could see it clearly, I knew one thing for certain. If I was going to confront him, it wouldn't be in private. It would be somewhere he couldn't escape. I didn't rush. That was my advantage. Mark thought silence meant ignorance. He mistook calm for weakness. Every morning he left the house believing he was still ahead of me, and every night he came back unaware that I was already planning his fall. I started small, a new email address, a password he would never guess. a folder on a cloud drive with a name so boring it blended into everything else. Inside it, I began building a second life of my own. I met with a lawyer first, not one of the loud ones with billboards and promises, a quiet woman in a narrow office that smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. I told her everything, without emotion, facts only, numbers, timelines. She listened, didn't interrupt, didn't react. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "He's been careful, but not careful enough." Those 4 words steadied me. Next came the financial advisor. He was older, methodical, the kind of man who spoke slowly because he had nothing to prove. He didn't ask why I was there. He asked what I wanted to protect. "My future," I said, and for the first time I meant it without Mark in the picture. We went through scenarios, worst cases, best outcomes, what could be frozen, what could be traced, what evidence mattered and what didn't. "Do not confront him yet," he warned. "Men like this move money fast when they feel exposed." I nodded. I already knew. Over the next 2 weeks, I copied everything: statements, emails, screenshots, login times, transaction patterns, even his lies. I wrote those down too, word for word, dated and time-stamped. I opened a separate account in my name only, perfectly legal, perfectly quiet. I redirected my income there, explaining nothing. Mark never noticed. He never checked that closely. At home, I played my role. I laughed at his jokes, asked about his day, listened as he complained about stress I now understood came from keeping his secrets balanced. Sometimes he'd look at me for a moment too long, like he was checking something, measuring. "You've been different," he said once. "Have I?" I smiled. "Probably just tired." He accepted that. They always do. The final step came unexpectedly. My financial advisor made a call, not in front of me, not dramatically, just a quiet phone conversation that changed everything. A few days later, he said, "There's someone you should meet." We sat in a neutral place, a cafe near the Bank District, mid-morning, public, safe. The man arrived exactly on time. Older, calm, wearing a simple gray coat that didn't draw attention. He shook my hand once firmly and sat down without ordering anything. He already knew my name. "He've reviewed what you sent," he said. "Your husband is relying on privacy to protect him." He met my eyes then. Privacy only works until someone asks the right questions. I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Relief. "Can you help me?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the street, then back at me. "Yes," he said finally, "but you need to understand something." I leaned forward. "If we do this," he continued evenly, "it won't happen quietly." And that was when I realized the confrontation I'd been avoiding was already taking shape, and it was going to happen in the one place Mark believed he was safest. I didn't ask him who he was. Not at first. Power doesn't announce itself. It waits to see if you recognize it. We met again 2 days later, this time in his office. No sign on the door, no receptionist, just a quiet hallway above a bank branch I'd passed 100 times without noticing. The room was spare. Desk, 2 chairs, a single framed certificate on the wall, turned slightly so the name wasn't easy to read. That felt intentional. He poured coffee without asking how I took it. "I work with financial institutions," he said, settling into his chair. "Risk management, compliance. When things go wrong quietly, I help fix them before they go wrong loudly." I thought of Mark's private accounts, the hidden transfers, the confidence. "And my husband?" I asked. The man in the gray coat folded his hands. "Your husband believes he's invisible because no one has challenged him yet." He slid a thin folder across the desk. Inside were things I hadn't given him: maps of transactions, patterns highlighted in clean, sharp lines, connections between accounts I didn't know existed, the same name appearing again and again, Marks, threaded through shell structures designed to confuse anyone who didn't know where to look. My stomach tightened. "This is bigger than you thought," he said calmly, "but that also makes it easier." Easier? My voice barely worked. People who hide money get careless. They assume complexity equals safety. He looked up at me. It doesn't. He explained the plan in pieces, never all at once. Enough for me to understand the direction, not enough to panic. The bank mattered. The timing mattered. Witnesses mattered. "Why not do this privately?" I asked. "Through lawyers?" He didn't hesitate. "Because your husband will lie and delay and move what he can." He leaned forward slightly. "But if the exposure happens inside the system he trusts, under rules he can't bend, then the control shifts instantly." I thought of the teller, the lobby, the cameras. "And the black card?" I asked, surprising myself. A faint smile crossed his face. "That ensures cooperation." I didn't press further. By the time I left, the plan was set. Dates, steps, what I should say, and more importantly, what I shouldn't. "Your role is simple," he told me at the door. "You act surprised, hurt, small." I swallowed. "I'm good at that." He paused, studying me for a moment. "I know," he said. "That's why this works." The days leading up to it felt unreal, like I was living in two timelines at once. One where I made dinner and asked about work, another where everything was already over. Mark just didn't know it yet. The night before, Mark kissed me absent-mindedly and said, "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." I smiled. For both of us. He laughed, thinking he knew what I meant. He didn't. The next morning, I suggested we stop by the bank together. "Just something small," I said. "I think there's an issue with the account." He sighed, irritated but confident. "Fine, it won't take long." As we drove there, he talked about interest rates and patience, about how people panic over numbers they don't understand. I watched the city pass by and said nothing, because I knew that when we walked through those doors, Mark's second life was about to step into the light, and once it did, there would be no way back. The bank lobby was brighter than I remembered. Too bright. White lights reflecting off polished floors, glass counters, stainless steel rails. The kind of place designed to feel clean, controlled, predictable. Mark liked predictable. The smell hit me first. Burnt coffee from the corner kiosk, warm paper, printer ink. A line of customers curled behind us, their shoes squeaking softly as they shifted their weight. Mark stood beside me, relaxed, one hand in his pocket. He leaned toward the counter like he owned it. I didn't. The teller smiled at first, routine, friendly. She typed, clicked, frowned slightly, then typed again. Her eyes flicked to the screen, then to me, then back to the screen. Something in her posture changed. "Ma'am," she said quietly, lowering her voice, "your joint account balance is $32. The number hung in the air. I laughed. It came out sharp and wrong, the sound of disbelief breaking through my throat. $32 couldn't even buy lunch. Heat rushed to my face as a man behind me sighed loudly, impatient. That's when Mark stepped closer. He leaned his elbow on the counter, grinning like this was entertainment. "Oh, come on," he said, loud enough for the whole lobby. "Don't act surprised." People turned. Just a little. Enough. I turned to him, my hands shaking now, no effort required. "Where is the money, Mark?" He rolled his eyes, smiling wider. "Relax, you wouldn't understand finances anyway." Then he said it, clear, cutting, deliberate. "You're just my wife, not my partner." The words landed like a slap. The lobby went silent. No shuffling, no coughs. Even the printer behind the desk stopped whirring, as if the room itself was holding its breath. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. I felt small, exposed, exactly as planned. Then, a man stepped out of line. Older, calm, gray coat, unremarkable unless you knew what to look for. "Excuse me," he said evenly, addressing the teller, not Mark. "Could you please pull up the transaction history for the last 90 days on this account?" Mark laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "And who are you supposed to be?" The man didn't answer. He placed a black card on the counter. The teller's eyes widened. Her spine straightened. Her hands moved faster. "Yes, sir," she said immediately. A ripple moved through the room. Whispers, phones lifting slightly. Mark's smile faltered as the screen filled with numbers. Large transfers, private accounts, repeated movements. One name appeared again and again. Mark's. Color drained from his face. "What is this?" he snapped, his voice cracking despite himself. The man in the gray coat finally looked at him. "This," he said calmly, "is evidence." Mark stepped back like he'd been struck. His confidence collapsed in real time, shoulders curling inward, eyes darting around the room as he realized something irreversible had happened. He was no longer in control. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to, because while everyone else in that lobby was watching Mark's world fall apart, I was already somewhere else, 3 steps ahead, watching, waiting, ready. And what Mark didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that this wasn't the end. It was the reveal. The silence didn't last long. It never does. A manager appeared, then another. Voices lowered, screens turned away from public view. Mark tried to speak, once, twice, but every word came out wrong, defensive, desperate. The man in the gray coat didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "These transactions trigger internal review," he said calmly. "Funds will be temporarily frozen pending investigation." Mark turned to me then. Not angry, not mocking, afraid. "You knew?" he whispered, like the truth might hurt less if it stayed quiet. I looked at him the way you look at a stranger who's finally shown you who they are. "I learned," I said. "There's a difference." The bank handled the rest. Forms, signatures, a private room. The lobby returned to its rhythm, but Mark never did. His second life, the one built on secrecy and my silence, had nowhere left to hide. Over the next weeks, everything unraveled. The private accounts weren't as private as he'd believed. Paper trails surfaced, emails, transfers tied to my credit, my income, my name. The same systems he trusted turned against him, legally, methodically, irreversibly. The money came back slowly, piece by piece, not all at once, not with satisfaction, just with finality, enough to rebuild, enough to breathe. Mark tried to negotiate, then apologize, then blame stress, ambition, love. I listened once. That was enough. I moved out before the paperwork was finished. A small apartment, quiet, sunlight in the mornings, a place that belonged to me alone. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. The man in the gray coat disappeared as quietly as he'd arrived. No goodbye, no credit taken, just a message, weeks later. "You did exactly what you needed to do." He was right. I didn't win because I was louder, or stronger, or smarter. I won because I paid attention. Because when someone tells you again and again that you wouldn't understand, they're really saying something else. They're counting on you not to look. I looked. And when I finally spoke, I didn't ask for revenge. I took back my voice, my future, and everything that was always mine. Life isn't fair, But what happened next changed everything. If you've ever faced something like this, subscribe, because the next story might feel personal.